Right, Spirit are the champions of IEM Cologne 2025, the third prestige event of the year. Obviously, we had Katowice at the beginning of the year, which was won by Vitality, funnily enough, over Spirit. Then we had the Major, which was obviously won by Vitality over the Mongols. And now we have Spirit beating Mouse to win IEM Cologne 2025, which is also Spirit's third event win of the year. They won the Blast Bounty that opened the year. That was the tournament where obviously Eternal Fire, now Aurora, took out Vitality really early on, and then Spirit just got to win the event and go back to back with the Major. Then they had, just before this last Major, they had the PGL Astana, where there weren't that many other good teams. Navi shit the bed, it ended up being like Astralis that was going deep, etc. And that was the one where Donk famously won and was almost like bombed because he knew that if they played like that at the Major, they wouldn't win the Major. Spoiler, they played maybe the same level or marginally better and didn't win the Major and didn't even make semis of it. So he was sort of right, wasn't he? This is the first prestige event win for them of 2025. Last year, they won Katowice early in the year. It was the first big S-tier event of Donk. And then they won the Major to close out the year. The only team this year that has won big S-tier trophies, obviously in the modern day, Wikipedia is going to say like a PGL's S-tier. I mean, the big events that have all the top teams there, the only one that's won those events this year has been Vitality. And all the really big events, they always win. So this is the first team not called Vitality to win one of those events this year. So even though they didn't actually play a Vitality at this tournament, that in itself is quite significant. We are very much in the Vitality era, even after this result. It's still really hard for people to stop Vitality. So every one of these trophies are to be cherished. Like, to me, this is like in the 90s when Michael Jordan was retired and then came back with 17 games at the end of the season, 95 or whatever. When the Rockets win those two, you can do the whole, but what would have happened if you'd have played the Bulls? What if Michael Jordan had retired? Yeah, but it's irrelevant. The reason those two rings have massive premium upon them, even if they're not as good as the years when Michael Jordan was in his heyday, is because those were those rare chances to win without having to play him directly. And there's plenty of other people didn't do that before and after Michael Jordan's zenith with the Chicago Bulls. So I think that's worth pointing out. Certainly, you can only beat who is put in front of you. And in this case, it's actually Vitality that failed to show up to play Spirit in the final. So you can't blame Spirit. Spirit didn't lose a series at this tournament, if you don't know. Now, coming in, crucially, they actually weren't considered a team that was going to win this tournament. If you looked at the odds, everyone thought it would be Vitality because they hadn't lost a best of 3 or best of 5 series all year long. After that first one to Eternal Fire, they were on, before this event, it would have been something like 34 series in a row, and they got to 37 before they were stopped here. Then you had Falcons, because they just brought Kiyosuke in. They already were an excellent team before, even though they bombed the Major. A lot of people would have thought they would win. If not them, how about Mouse? They looked so good at the Major when they had that game on Inferno. Obviously, they are, in theory, creeping closer to getting over the hump at the big arena events and actually winning one of these with all the top teams there. They even did go on to beat Vitality at this event. I think, actually, after that, some people still might not have even had Spirit, because Spirit were a team where you saw them at that Major, and it's like no matter how good Donk played, they couldn't have won that Major. I don't think they would have won the Major at the end of Shanghai if Magic's hadn't have had the life game. I genuinely think, Shiro before the final and then Magic's in the final were the key play that allowed Donk, who was having the most supernatural Major run ever, to win the tournament. You weren't going to get that more. That's why I made that point on shows like Hot Take Point Made. You could actually argue that Spirit winning that Major and Magic's having his life game will mean that Spirit don't really win much in the first season of this year. Spoiler, they didn't, because they'll just think that roster could win a Major again, even though actually that was such an outlier performance. It implied it couldn't win another Major. I won't say about Na'Vi here, but you obviously draw your own conclusions from last year, how that worked out for them. So I think actually some people might have even considered maybe this wear rate change isn't good enough. Maybe this will make them just a top 8 team again. Maybe Mongols will take their place in the top 5. Look, Aurora didn't have Xantares, so fair enough. But I don't know, maybe people even thought Makaze and Na'Vi would... Look, he did actually bring a change, but maybe thought that would level them up. Maybe some lunatic even believed FaZe would be out with Brokey. I don't know about that one, to be fair. But but Liquid, finally they've had time to have a break. So actually, I don't think many people had Spirit as a favourite for this. And I don't think, quite frankly, until Mouse beat Vitality, that anyone thought Spirit was winning this event. In fact, I even saw when Mouse did beat Vitality, a lot of people were shocked that Mouse were the underdog because they'd beaten Spirit in the BO3s quite a lot recently, something like 2 or 3 times in a row. And actually, the betting odds ended up going towards Spirit, but a lot of people were complaining. They were like, Mouse should be the favourite. I saw loads of people betting on Mouse for this final. Not me, of course. So I think actually people did sleep on Spirit a little bit. If you go and watch my video I did with Ted, which was very early, I think it might have been during the playing portion of Cologne, we reviewed basically all the big roster moves of the roster mania in the offseason after the major. And actually we put the top 2 roster moves were Keisuke, because it had to be, didn't it? Look, you don't know how anyone else would play, but he clearly is some cracked out prodigy young player who looked like he was going to be very good. Maybe not as good as Donk, but actually turned out, tell you what, maybe like 90% of Donk when he came on the scene. But the question would be, how's Nico going to adapt to his role? That's still a question. How's Tessus going to manage this? How's Zonic going to make having essentially 3 aggressive playmaker, space creator riflers all in one team at the same time without a lurking presence? So, by the way, those questions have not been answered, but understandably, that's what people were looking towards. Those are the moves people thought were sick. Well, the other one that like me and Ted put up there, but a lot of people seem to sleep on, was the spirit change. So they took out Magic, so I get it, it's really popular. Everyone loves his personality. He's funny in interviews. And in the game, he's not a good player, but he's a canny player. For me, his skill level, he used to once upon a time, believe it or not, himself, at a much lower scale, be an up-and-coming player with an all-around game who could AWP and who could rifle and had like a spicy playing style. In the modern day, he plays like one of those people who just min-maxes the supportive roles, doesn't he? He takes all the shit roles and play the SMGs to give other people the AWP like Shiro and get guns in a Donk's hand, and he'll sacrifice himself for anyone he wants to, and he'll play on a site on his own, and he'll take the choke point where all the enemies bum rush you and it's really hard. But the problem was, his firepower wasn't good enough to justify that. Here's the thing. I think in this team, you had an issue a bit like you have over in FaZe Clan. It goes like this. I can make a case either way for Carrigan to stay and then Rain to be removed. Or if you want Rain to stay, you have to figure out a way to remove Carrigan and put someone else in there. But you can't have both, because both of them combined, beyond the odd event, like every 4 events for Rain or something, you're just not going to get enough firepower out of them. Similar problem they had in Spirit, in my opinion. If you had Chopper and you have Magics, then you're just not going to get enough firepower in the game, especially because Zontix isn't a massive fragger. He's more of like an impact player. So it means the pressure you put on Donk and Shiro, who, look, they've done it a bunch of times now, they can do it, but they can't do it every event. So to me, the reason the Zwei move was good is, look, I still don't know how the roles are going to work out. They've clearly switched up his roles. He does not play how he did in Amiga, and he hasn't shown the form he did in Amiga. But if you saw him in Amiga, he was a player with skill. Like, he was putting up KPR numbers that you cannot fake the funk of when you're on LAN at majors, etc. And he did look like someone with firepower, which is what you want in this team. The issue so far is, it's hard to know what would happen with him coming in. He's not a really famous player. He's not a proven LAN player at tier 1. So I think a lot of people slept on it. But to me, look, I did think he won't have some of the intangibles of Magix. Magix is a veteran at this point in time. But I thought that's surely going to be a firepower upgrade. Now, the funny thing is, people seemed a bit muted about that move. And quite frankly, I think part of that is because of the Keisuke Falcons angle. I think a lot of people looked at that move and they hoped it would be Keisuke came into this team instead of Magix. And since that didn't happen, and Zwei isn't on the level of Keisuke in terms of ceiling, potential, talent seemingly so far, even though to be fair, he's played at a major, I haven't seen that from Keisuke. It's not the same level of player. So the difference is, I would be way more hyped if Keisuke joined this team. I actually think he could have absolutely coexisted with Donk. And they might even have been like one of the scariest fucking like aggressive rifle duos ever to play CS. You'd have to go back to like Forrest and fucking Gox or something back in the day if you want to get some comparable players from 1.6, I think. So I think everyone's a bit bummed that it's not Keisuke, and that's like, well, can it at least be Perfecto? Oh wait, he's joined VP. Well, fuck, who's left? And then Zwei comes in, who's not a big name player. That's the issue. If it was Perfecto, you'd imagine he could be a better version of Magix. If it was Keisuke, you go, there's the firepower. In this case, Zwei is kind of neither, and he doesn't have a big name. So I get why people slept on him. I get that completely. But I did quietly expect this to be a good change. In fact, I think we haven't even really seen the fruits of this change yet. I think, amazingly, partly because of what Mouse did, they've managed to win this event without Zwei playing particularly well. In fact, he looked like he struggled a little bit in some of his roles. Even though I will say, even the numbers he was putting up, it didn't look as bad at times in the server to me. The earlier games did. Understandably, you get thrown in the deep end with a top team after being the big fish in a small pond of being on fucking little Namiga, Belarusian team, that most people couldn't even name 3 players from. So if we go into this one, I actually think the amazing thing is he didn't even see peak spirit in this tournament. So here we are. We're at Cologne. Obviously, they only played in the group, so they're in Group B. They played against Heroic in the opener. Very close age to start the tournament. So they actually could have lost to that new look Heroic, who, remember, have lost some Pius. He's in G2. Now they have the Grix guy, who fully of himself is Belarusian, to go along with Tenir. Really close Ancient, which is quite interesting, by the way, because Ancient ended up being quite a pivotal map for Spirit in this tournament. Super, super close game. That's OT. Second game on Nuke, by the way, was actually a carry performance by Shiro. Bizarrely, that map, he just seems to have something a little bit extra on. Think of the Perfect World Major against Mouse last year. Even though they lost it, he was playing fucking awesome. That also seems to bizarrely be a map where sometimes Donk, mainly it's only against the top teams, plays a little bit weaker, or at least when he's on T side, can become a little bit more neutralised. On CT side, he can't do shit about it. His long range spray is too good. So, nice opener there. You still got past the tougher game, but even so, and this wasn't a great series from Zve. Then you come, amazingly, you play Aurora here. Now, I think that's mad because I actually thought NIP was going to beat them. This was a close series. NIP, I actually think, is probably a better team overall than Aurora, because Aurora doesn't have Xantares. They had to have a stand-in here. So I actually think this was all day going to be a win for Spirit. It was a 2-0. Look, it was close because Spirit has a hard time blowing people out. They don't come beyond certain positions with the most insane firepower. And their map pool is, like, pretty good, but it's not, like, super elite. I don't think their map pool actually even compares to Mouse's. Vitality is obviously levels above. Them and Falcons, for me, are way more like super good on this map, not very good on this other map elsewhere. Maybe Navi's more of a well-rounded team now. They're just not excellent on any maps, their problem. So that series was actually kind of a fun one because it ended up being a giga carry series from Donk, by the way. I think he went plus 32 over both maps combined. So he absolutely gave him that fucking work. Then in the group decider, where you're guaranteed to make the playoffs, they beat Mouse. Now, that was big in itself. Mouse came in on something like 3 series winning streak, including the quarterfinals of the major. So, funnily enough, people missed that actual narrative point. You know how Mouse got to get revenge on Vitality for the major semis? By the way, you know that revenge thing? Look, Cologne is important, but I tell you what, I'd rather win the semi of the major than go on to win the major than win the semis of Czech's Notes. Cologne, not a major, and then not win the tournament. You can see how that revenge doesn't really quite work in the same way, does it? But okay, this is revenge for Spirit. Spirit was on a 3-series losing streak. They just lost the one at the major where they probably think themselves, wait a minute, I'd have been in the fucking final maybe, or maybe I could have beaten Vitality and won another major and gone back to back. So you got your revenge here. You did beat them 2-1. By the way, pretty banter series all in all. Another big Shiro series, by the way. That was a big performing factor. Remember, a lot of people now, analysts, are going to get really horny and tell you Tosh is better than Shiro. Now, listen to the thing. I think they have such contrasting AWPing styles. I don't even really know what we're talking about when we say that. Like, I think Tosh is the super aggressive repeat a million times guy. Shiro's the really boring placement crosshair AWPer who never misses a shot and goes for the conservative angles, right? Tosh is the guy who'll do a repeat in here and either get the kill super fast or gamble dying. Shiro's the one who waits on that off angle. You know he's there, but you walk into it slowly on a wide swing and he kills you, and you're just pissed off that you didn't play more passive against him. I think Shiro is the better of the two. He is more consistent with his output. I'd give the comparison would be, I'll use another Mouse AWPer. In his heyday, Chris J was a really flashy AWPer, lots of shots all over the place. It wasn't quite as good as Torgy is now. Whereas Device certainly can hit the good shots, but he's a bit more of a boring AWPer, isn't he? He was a bit more of a standard AWPer who just let his team play around him. So big series from Shiro. That was a big reason, by the way, why it wasn't actually 2-0 to Mouse. It really could have been a win on Ancient, map they've always liked. And then it could have been the epic Mirage game. They had another epic Giga OT Mirage game, just like at the major. Now, this time around, it was Mouse coming out on the winning side, not getting tilted by that. And actually, this is one where Spirit, I think Spirit was up like 10-4 or 10-3 or something, and then ended up being an OT loss. So you could say maybe that will break Spirit. That's Mouse that gets broken like that. Spirit actually, this is one of the crazy things about Donk for some reason. They actually are pretty decent at resetting between maps, which to me is the true hallmark of an all-time great team. Mouse aren't as good at it, in my opinion. So that's one area I also give insane props to Donk. He is actually wise beyond his years in that sense. It doesn't seem like he lets one map get to him. And that is really rare. Only the super elite all-time great players can get to that. In fact, I'd even argue people like Zewu sometimes let a map get to them. And he's potentially the best player in the world, if not of all time, right? The decider, though, was crucial because it was actually Mouse that opted into this overpass. Spirit weren't the ones who wanted to play this map at this tournament. They were just willing to play it. And they absolutely clapped them from CT side initially, but then they also smurfed the T side. I thought this was actually quite a telling series. True, the one flaw of this one is, one, if you ever get fluke results like some of these here, like just not very good teams on it, you can get some nonsense team gets into the round of 6, but also it's not in theory as much pressure because if you lose, you still get to the playoffs anyway, don't you? So I do think this match isn't quite as much pressure as you'd hope it would be, but I still think this was a pretty competitive match. It was pretty good. gave both teams a chance to win the tournament, you imagined. I also do think the overpass angle could have played out differently later on. Like, if they'd have had Vitality in the final of best of 5, I think we might have seen that map. That would have been a fun one to see, right? Then we got to the playoffs. In the playoffs, in the semis, amazingly, they played Na'Vi. Now, you wouldn't have thought so. At the beginning of the tournament, you would think something like, there's going to be Falcons in the mix, right? Maybe Falcons is going to come out second, therefore you'll play against someone like Falcons because they'll be on your side of the bracket. What about Mongols themselves? Obviously, Falcons shit the bed at this point in time, but Mongols, the runners-up in the major, they got all the way to there. They played Vitality, but then go to the playoffs. The problem is, Na'Vi actually sort of just quietly crept along. They beat FaZe Clan. They lost to Mouse quite close. They won a close series against an IP. Absolutely could have lost the decider there. They beat FaZe in a not as close series. They got there. They beat Mongols in a close series. Na'Vi was just creeping through with nice performances from their new rookie. They got to the semis. Now look, fair fucks, Na'Vi did win actually, a 13-9 nuke game. But this series just shows why Spirit is just a better team than Na'Vi. Right, first of all, in this era, where we've changed away from Na'Vi being the team where like Inferno's like a weird fringe third map, or we let someone else pick it and we just rely on bit. The modern Na'Vi, actually Inferno is their main go-to map. Well, one of the problems they're always going to have against Spirit is Spirit permas Inferno. So immediately you're going to have a tricky time there. Then the Mirage, that was such a strong fucking dominant home map last year for Na'Vi, isn't as dominant this year. In fact, when they play on it this year, the joke is, it used to be at their height at Katowice last year that Spirit, a dodgier map for them was Mirage. They pulled this one out, having to come from T-side. They had to go 8-4 T-side to win 13-11. That is a big-time win on Na'Vi's map pick. Then, admittedly, yeah, you lose your map pick of the nuke. By the way, that's bizarre because actually, Na'Vi on nuke, that was their weak map in the latter part of the last year that started to make their map pool bleed a little bit. And it was actually a huge CT side shutdown. As I said, this is actually a rare map. I think more teams should study this because it's always going to be there in the veto, by the way. They're never going to perma it. You can get Donk onto that map, and if you do a really good job on CT side, he can be to some degree neutralised. Listen, it's going to be hard when you swap over if you give him too many rounds. He didn't in this case, by the way. You only gave him 2 rounds. But this just seemed to be one of the only maps where you can sometimes make him be a bit quieter. But at the same time, I've also seen Shiro pick up the slack too many times. Then they decided on Ancient. As I said, Ancient ended up being quite key for Spirit in this tournament. It was a massive smackdown. A massive smackdown. Remember, Na'Vi at their best had worked Ancient by the latter part of last year into one of the maps that was coming into their pool where it's like, oh, I think we can play that where we need to. They're in so much trouble in their map pool. Admittedly, they're still working in their own rookie who showed some promise here. Just he couldn't maintain in the playoffs, whereas the rookie on the side of Spirit wasn't needed. You didn't need him to. Whereas you need actually Makaza to be something of a star player on Na'Vi, I think. Interesting detail, obviously, is that the only close map was the first one. Aside from that, the others weren't as close. Like I say, Spirit never really truly got back into the second one. Then the third one was just a Smurf series. By the way, Donk and Shiro, both big-time players again here. There's a really big series. So then we come to the final. Now, on paper, look, I actually took this to be a 3-1 Spirit. I thought Mouse would win one map. Look, they could have taken the Ancient here. As I say, it ended up being a very key map. This is the one you'll always remember is the Ancient maps for Spirit throughout the tournament. This was the big reasons to why they were able to get these wins and get where they were going. But the key thing to remember here is this. Ancient was actually, I believe, the Spirit pick. Yes. So the crazy thing is, Mouse actually got to pick Mirage and then Nuke. Those are the 2 maps they went for. Spirit won the Mirage, which is quite shocking. As I say, it's never been the biggest strength of Spirit. Meanwhile, Mouse has always been like one of the sleeper OP teams, no matter what their win rate is on that map. That's why they could come close to beating or beat an Na'Vi on that and play a Vitality close. Then you go down, Nuke, always been a solid map for them. Spirit, it's one where they used to be really strong at last year. They're not as good now. Like I say, I think people have figured certain things out about Donk on that map. The idea those are just blowouts is crazy. I mean, if you Mouse, you needed to get this Ancient one over the line. Because also, look how you're starting. That's the only one where you even won the first half. You won the first half 8-4, and you still lost 9-3. Elsewhere, you're just getting blown out the water. And in fact, Spirit wins all the CT sides. Spirit's normally the team where you think of them, they're not crazy skill across the board. So CT side's not going to be their strength. They're going to be strong on T side, right? They're going to have Donk going in and doing epic shit and getting traded off trading off Chopper or Chiro trading him in the frag. The idea they're going to smirk everyone CT side and actually their map pool is like 1.5 times better. It's no wonder Mouse couldn't do anything against them. They only lost 2 maps in the whole tournament. One to Spirit, one to Na'Vi, 13-9 nuke. And then they lost that one to Mouse earlier, which was the Giga OT one that they almost had in the bag. So this isn't even Spirit playing on the map pool that they've been struck. It's map like Dust 2 last year that they were going to. They were even trying to make the Anubis work themselves as a pick. So they've had to reshuffle their map pool, but it's just worked for them. It's just gone so fucking well. And in this final, I actually thought Mouse, believe it or not, another reason I picked Spirit to win is because I thought Mouse has just beaten Vitality, but I've seen this before. It's like what FaZe did at those 2 majors. When you beat the biggest team, the team that you're not supposed to be able to beat and is supposed to win the tournament, unfortunately, in your brain, even as pros, part of you thinks, fuck, I've done it already. You sort of allow yourself to celebrate. In fact, even worse, you think to yourself, that was the real final. Then you think in the final, oh, this is a team on my level or lesser than me. That's the case with Spirit in terms of Mouse. We should be able to beat this. In fact, it's a BO5. I've got a deeper map pool than them. I think that's true. I've got overall better firepower than them. That's all true. The problem is, first of all, Mouse doesn't win big S-tier arena trophies, do they? That's been their problem, that everyone says they choke. As I say, they only choke now against the absolute elite teams like Spirit, maybe a Falcons if they played them, against Vitality, and it has to be in the biggest matches. That's where they choke, but they still do choke. And 2 of the players, they're both from Israel, that sadly have this choking issue in later games, is Exertion and Spinks. Those 2 players, for some reason, it's not even that they're always choking or bad, but they definitely get way less reliable and way less people that you can just expect to give you a world-class rifle performance when it's the semis and the final of a big tournament. In fact, I already thought Spinks played a pretty good semi. So as a result, when you got to this, in fact, everyone did on Mouse there. That was a really good semi in general from them. When they got to the final, both those guys didn't perform at the level I want to see from them. I need to see more than that. It's why, on the one hand, I fuck with Spinks, like, throwing the medal away. Like, listen, if you're someone who won the event last year and you've been on teams, including this one, that, like, potentially can win the big trophies, second isn't cool for you. Second's cool if you're like Mongols, you're not supposed to be in the final. Yeah, it's fucking dope. If I was at Aurora players that game saying, I'd fucking celebrate it. If I was in Astralis or Furia, second would be really important for you. If you're someone like Mouse, you absolutely, after beating Vitality, You're meant to think, fuck, I've just lost a final. It's like Jose Mourinho thing. Finals are for winning, not playing. They're only for playing if you were never meant to be in the final. If the semis was the furthest you were supposed to go. Or you're playing some generational team that you have no chance to beat. By the way, Donk in the finals, as you can imagine, also smurfed. He was plus 21 for the 3 maps. So I think this is a very comprehensive finals performance. In general, in the tournament, excellent stuff. They had their times again where it was close. They still rely on Donk massively. They still haven't gotten much out of the new rookie. But the map pool, much improved. I want to see how many of those can maintain, because people should be studying the fuck out of their Ancient now. People have got to figure out what have they tweaked on Mirage. But Map pool seemed way sturdier. Donk was superlative, as we'll get to in a moment. Shiro played very well. Zontix was just fine. Didn't really have any choke games. Seemed like a well-called tournament, even though they were winning a lot of CT sides. So I actually think an excellent performance generally from Spirit. But the obvious angle, and we'll get to it in a second, is they didn't have to play Vitality, did they? They didn't have to play Falcons, did they? They had a bunch of teams that you would still like to see them play, because even though they win this event, it's hard to see them as the best team in the world, isn't it? So crucially, until I see Spirit beat Vitality, and at the moment, by the way, if you ever play them in a final, this is why it was more likely that a Falcons or a Mouse would be the ones to beat them. In a semi, you at least have a chance to beat them. You basically have to play 1.5 maps well and then get a little bit of luck. In a final, in a BO5, which are all the big events now, you're just never going to get it, except EWC, by the way. You're just never going to beat them in a BO5. Or if you do, you're going to have a truly generational team that I'm not sure this particular lineup or the last one of Spirit actually is. I think Donk is a generational player. I think Shiro's on the borderline. Beyond that, I don't think many of those names will be in Hall of Fame in 10 years from now or 20 years from now. In fact, they'll be known as people who played with Donk and Shiro. And in fact, people will look back and go, how did Donk win with those? But maybe he is the GOAT. That's what future generation will say. So I'm sorry, even though you've just won a giant event, one of the best in the world and one of the most important of the year, you didn't beat Vitality, and if you actually played Falcons, assuming they get good again, I think a lot of people would be interested in those matches and favour the other teams. In this tournament, you faced Mouse twice. That's big. They've had your number, but it's always been, in my opinion, a back and forth rivalry there. And the difference is Spirit are less chalky than Mouse. You faced Na'Vi, but they haven't really gotten back to full power yet. Aurora didn't have Xantares. FaZe is a mess. Mongols, look, if you didn't see, there's actually a stat someone had online that they're something like 3-15 against top 5 teams. Like, they're just not actually the crazy upset merchants people think they are. They tend to beat, they're a gatekeeping team. They beat the teams below themselves and then lose to elite teams in the playoffs. At least they don't just chalk and lose to themselves and Eternal Fire / Aurora anymore, though. Or maybe even the Na'Vis of the world. So to me, you're not number one or even really a potential world number one because you won this event. You're not world beaters. I would still take Vitality to beat you tomorrow. Like I said, I might even take Falcons to beat you. I think Mouse, as long as it's not a massive stage game, can still beat them. I think the crucial thing to me is this. It was really impressive by Donk. It was excellent to take advantage of the opportunity given to you by not having to play a Vitality or Falcons. And then crucially, them and Mouse still look like one of the best matchups in World Counter-Strike. You could argue that is the best matchup you can get in an arena right now. There's no FaZe clan in terms of FaZe magic. Na'Vi's not that same team from last year. No one even knows if Falcons is going to be there. Vitality, in theory, just beats everyone unless they play really badly like they did here. Like, essentially, it really did take Flames going 1-18 for it to even be viable to beat them. Otherwise, it would have been a third map. I think they would have won that train if they'd have even had like 7 kills or something ridiculous. So, to me, the best matchup in World Counter-Strike now is Mouse against Team Spirit in a playoff match, but probably not the final, probably a BO3. At least we get that from that. Now, interestingly, as I say, I don't actually think, even though they've just won an event with him, that this way move even really showed much yet. Like, he clearly had different roles. He wasn't fragging anywhere close to what he did in Namiga, even when it was against, like, comparable opposition. They also got quite a big Shiro performance, which you don't get every tournament. He's definitely a consistent player, but these big, like, I'm top 3 or 4 rated in the tournament, I'm an MVP, I can carry the series, they don't come as often. Now, it did come here, it's part why you're able to win, but I don't know how much you can rely on that. That'll win you like 1 out of 4 tournaments, 1 out of 3 tournaments. You're not going to get that every time. I think it was also very interesting that they won the 1 overpass they were forced to play. I also wish in the final that could have gone all the way down to an overpass. I want to see what happens when they actually have to play it more than once. Because I want to see when other teams get bedded in on that map. That's going to be a pretty tactical map. That's going to be a map where, listen, someone like Shiro could be fantastic on CT side, but then will he be a bit too baity in how he rotates? Think of GM on that map. On T side, how will Chopper call? Will it be like lots of fast, aggressive play with Donk? Will it be the slow build-up and people will figure out how to stop them a little bit like they can on Nuke sometimes? A lot of questions to be answered there, right? Now, crucially for me, I think a narrative that's really cool about this Spirit core, 4 of the players that aren't called Zway, winning this event is one that people will miss because people just have too short memories, unfortunately. Think about Cologne last year. IEM Cologne 2024, remember, was like the second big event after the play break, basically. After the play break, we had EWC, where it was like shockingly the new Snacks G2 in the final against Na'Vi, who everyone thought was a fluke because of the major, and had just had that final and lost to like Spirit themselves at the end of the season. And Na'Vi won it. That was the one where Spirit was a bit meh at that event. Then you went to the Cologne and they came last place in the main event. They lost to G2, the same G2, in the lower bracket and got totally smurfed on even by Hunter, if you remember, on Nuke. And in the upper bracket, they lost to Mongols, who at the time were just like a canny little upset team. It was actually in the months after that the Mongols got their shit together, became a playoff team, and then eventually, by the time they got to the major, became a major playoff team, and then by this last major now, are like a team that actually can get to the semis of the major or even further, at least if they don't have to beat elite teams. So back then, those 2 teams didn't have the same shine. Now, funnily enough, that G2 roster, but they went on to win 2 blasts after that. That same Mongols roster made the last 2 major playoffs and was in the final of that major. But this is all stuff in the future. Everyone saw those results. And I can tell you, if you go back, I could show you in a video. Everyone wrote this team off. It was Donk's worst event by far, and all the haters came out because it was after the playback. Like, it was just a fluke. See, he is nowhere near Ziwu and Monacy. And the whole topic was, that ends the player of the year race. It's over for him. Because his numbers at the major were just like pretty good, but not like as good as Katowice. So they wrote Donk off. They wrote Spirit off and said, this roster can't win tournaments anymore. They have won Katowice, but they're not going to win anything else except lol bet booms. And everyone was like, they're done. They can't win a major. Then everyone also was like, oh, they need like massive roster moves to do anything in the squad. Right, well, think about this. 1, Donk went on to be player of the year. 2, Spirit did win the next major with that roster. And now with 4 of the same 5 players and not some giant name upgrade or some perfecto type guy coming in, they've also now won Cologne. This is fucking epic. What a great storyline that is. That's one of the reasons also supposedly Donk cried, because last year I mean, they say he was thinking of quitting. I don't think he was going to fucking quit less than 1 year into his career. But I imagine he was quite morose, coming last place at a tournament like that, and having easily his worst individual tournament. And remember, as you saw here, another reason he cried when he won his. Cologne is one where he was a little kid watching people like Forrest win that tournament, watching people like fucking Olaf Meister and Cold Zera and Simple all win this giant tournament. And then he goes there for his first time after the miracle run of Katowice, where he's won the whole thing and been declared the fucking GOAT rookie. He goes to this one and bombs last place. That's his worst tournament. Yeah, I can imagine that would stick with you. That would bother you. So I do think it's a fucking dope storyline in terms of like a comeback, the contrast between this year and last year. In fact, if we just go and look at how this team played at this tournament, right, Donk's numbers are impossible. Forget the rating for a second. Just look at the KD. Think how aggressive this guy is. Like, those are bonkers numbers. Shiro's, by the way, are very good numbers. If that was the numbers of your best player, you'd still be in with a shout to win a tournament. If Na'Vi's best player had those numbers, Na'Vi would be like in the semis or in the final. They would have a chance to win. If that's going to be your second best player, then you can do some Jordan Pippen shit and just win with those players. You don't need much more. Zontic just has to do his job. And then Zwei, you want a little bit more firepower from him in the future, obviously. But his job is to play Magic's roles and be a slightly better version. And then Chopper's just going to do Chopper things and call the way that Hallie and the others want him to call. Now, interestingly to me, if you go to the opening kills, this is why Donk genuinely might be the best player to ever play any esports game ever, including all versions of Counter-Strike. Because look how much Donk is used on the T side. His opening attempts are over 30%. If you're at 30%, you're usually either like the bait and the meat that they just use to bait out the other team, or you're just the perma entry guy, right? He is your superstar, best player in the world. He is taking 32.7%, and he has over 60% success rate. By the way, if that was even with this level of usage, 30 plus, if that was even like 45, I'd go, wow, this guy's fucking insane. 50 would be very good. 60 is incomprehensible. Like the difference is Shiro can have that because he barely ever takes the attempts. Although for an AWP, that's not bad actually. But that is absolutely unplayable. Like, this is one of the hardest carry performances you will ever see from a player, just like he did at the past major, etc. And then, as I say, bizarrely, it was actually CT side where the team was also smurfing. Not really what you normally think of when you think of Spirit. Shiro, unreal fragging numbers on CT. Look at that. Look at the number on CT. That's inhuman. And then even the rest of them performed fairly well. Like Zwei even had a decent performance. Zontix was solid. Even Chopper wasn't that bad on CT side. So the interesting thing for me is the Donk angle. Right? Donk's stats are absolutely inhuman. He is a mega carry. You saw before that B-Trams guy did that graphic. He is one of the only super carries of all time where if he actually gets below a 1.0 HLTV rating, they've never won ever. Ever. We're not even talking Nico in Mouse Sports, which is a giga carry role, or Simple in like early Na'Vi, or fucking Keserato in those dodgy Fury. No. This guy, it's impossible for him to win the game if he doesn't play essentially at least pretty good. At least pretty good. I mean, Zero right now, he had years where he wouldn't win if he didn't play well. But even then, it was not 0% win rate. And actually, now he has loads of help. So I think this is bonkers. And because Donk has won the MVP because of this, I've got to say, maybe this guy is just the best fragger ever. I don't know if he's the best player ever. I need to see more from him then. I want some more years of longevity. I want to see him do it more, etc. I still think Simple takes that one. But if you ask me who is the best fragger ever, it might be Donk. He has an inhuman, aptitude to frag. It reminds me of when you have players in football where you can have an amazing striker who doesn't score a billion goals. It doesn't always have to be a Ronaldo or something. But it's when they just have that natural instinct as a striker in football where everything just seems to go in. An accidental tap goes in, a tapping goes in, off the shoulder goes in, a misdirected header goes in. Think of someone like Suarez or something like that. Like, they just have this crazy, if you were really old school, Ian Rush, they just have some crazy natural instinct. Robbie Fowler for goal. I did pick all Liverpool players there. I had my reasons. So, crucially, winning this MVP is already bonkers. Because think about this. He won Katowice last year and was the MVP. He won the major last year and was the MVP. And he's doing record-breaking numbers where he does this, by the way. Now he's won Cologne and he was the MVP. Right? This guy's resume is already insane and he's played just over a year and a half. Like, if you go to, this is from CSGO and CS2, all the MVPs from HLTV. Now, to be fair, people in the early days, like a Get Right, a Device, a Simple, Kenny S, Nico, you had to basically win the tournament most of the time until about 2018 to win those. The odd one was won by Kenny S, and elsewhere there was one won by fucking Twists or whatever. But aside from that, you pretty the same for Shocks. That's why he doesn't have as many. That's why some of these other players don't have that many. And people like Zero, Simple Device also won some online as well. But The idea that you are already, as Donk, a year and a half in your career, you're at 9. Right? That means literally there are 5 players who've won more MVPs than you over all of CSGO and CS2 combined. That is inhuman. I mean, absolute insanity. Like, it looks like for real, by next year, Donk will probably be like 4th on this list. They'll probably have, what, like 12 MVPs or something, 11 MVPs? And it'll only be the GOAT candidates of CSGO that he'll already be behind. I mean, this is just inconceivable shit. With that said, though, I do think there's an angle that I hate about this, which is to have 9 MVPs over that period is already very impressive. I do think it already gives you, as long as the body of work, probably the fastest GOAT, greatest of all time case ever in Counter-Strike. It's even quicker than Zewu, because Zewu didn't have those MVPs and those big event wins. He just had the excellent performance, although not as much at the majors in his first year. And by the way, especially if you just want your greatest of all time, if you do the thing, this is an angle people don't do, I think greatest of all time, one of the key functions is you could pick a year or a few months where it's that player. You put that player against anyone in history, he's the best ever. Now, if you want to just say Donk from now is the best player ever, we can have that discussion. It's a very valid discussion. Yeah, he doesn't have longevity, he doesn't have the longer career, he doesn't have more accomplishments, etc. People like Device would have more accomplishments, etc. Some people in 1.6. But if you want to talk just how he played and his ability level and his ceiling and his consistency and what he can do against every type of opponent, this guy would be in the conversation. Now, one thing I don't like is, I understand what people mean by the colloquial terminology of like, he's completed CS. Because the logic is, the big events, the prestige ones you want to win, the equivalent of the Grand Slams, he's done the career Grand Slam, hasn't he? Because he's been the MVP of IEM Cologne, the major, and he's been player of the year. In theory, that's like the best you can do in terms of winning one of each thing. The reason I don't like the completed CS is because I'll give you a very obvious contrast. So by that logic, guys, you don't think Device completed CS, because Device never won Cologne. So even though Device won Katowice as a non-major and as a major, and won, just the 4 majors, was the MVP of 2 of the majors, and I think could have been the MVP of all 4 majors, won the most MVPs in CSGO to one point in time, especially if you take out online ones, and was like, top 3 a whole bunch of time, top 5 a whole bunch of time, but he didn't complete CS because he didn't just win one of each trophy. Let's not be silly. It's better to win 4 majors than it is to win 1 Cologne, 1 Katowice, 1 major. I'd rather have 4 majors than that. In fact, you know what? If you said to me, you can have like 1 of each, or you can have just 3 majors, I'd take the 3 majors, mate. The 3 majors still, even though it might actually be harder to win a Katowice and Cologne now, they just have more prestige. So the completed thing does make people think like, you could retire tomorrow and you never have to do anything. No. Greatness isn't just about winning the championship. Like, put it this way, Giannis in NBA has won the championship. So Jokic, right? Are they already the GOAT with their career because of that? Have they completed basketball? They were the MVPs as well. They've been the MVPs of the league. Have they completed? No, because if you contrast them with Michael Jordan, you're going to go, wait a minute. Michael Jordan has 5 MVPs, 6 NBA championships, 6 finals MVP. Yeah, you're going to do that, aren't you? So it's not as simple as he's completed it, because completed also in a game sense implies that you did 100% of the game. Well, in this scenario, it's like we're doing fucking speed running or something, but without all the dodgy stuff on Discord with kids. It's like you're doing speed running and you're trying to set a faster speed. That's why Wilt Chamberlain made that mistake. He'd done it all in his NBA career. He had the most points. He'd won the NBA championship twice as a star and as a facilitator. He was one of the best defensive players. He'd been the MVP a bunch of times. He scored the most points. So he thought he could retire and go, well, that's it. I've got all the records. Lol. And what he didn't realise was, because later, thanks to sports science and the NBA getting bigger and more money, loads more players came along, and people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar just kept playing forever and got his scoring title. People came along who were like Michael Jordan and won so many titles and MVPs. Now people don't think of you as the GOAT when you were the best scorer before. In fact, they don't even think of you as the best scorer. I guarantee if Wilt was alive now, he'd say, if I knew, I'd have just fucking played 10 more years and just put every record completely out of reach. In fact, I'd have never even had that period in the Lakers where I played more defensively and just fucking tried to facilitate. I'd have just scored every time down the court. Apparently that's what you're all judging me off. Similarly, if you're Donk, you wouldn't want to retire now, even if you've won and completed it. You want to win like 6 majors. You want to win so many MVPs, no one can ever touch you. You want to put the highest average so high, he already has the high for a major. You want to put everything completely out of reach and make these discussions way harder for all the fanboys, and to know yourself from playing now against the best and shadow boxing what the old great players did, that you can go to bed going, I was the greatest player of all time. I gave it everything, and I actually maxed out I didn't just win once each time. I maxed out all the categories. I do think, though, as a final topic, that Spirit, it's going to sound mad if you're a Spirit org owner, because you're going to be like, Thorin, what are we supposed to do, bro? We won the major. Now then we won Blast Bounty. Then we were in the Katowice final. Now we just won Cologne. Like, homie, do I have to just be Vitality? In a way, yes, because when you have Donk, you could be like Vitality. If you had gotten Kiyosuke, or I think even Perfecto, and you put them in the same team with Donk and Shiro, I think you would have a very real chance to break up the Vitality hegemony. I think you would have a chance to topple them and give Donk a real legit chance every time he plays against ZywOo to just be better than him in the game and therefore force the win. This actually reminds me, I want to make a key contrast here, of Michael Jordan's career. Because I think when you look at Shiro, a bit like Scottie Pippen, they're slightly underrated because they're not true, like, number one superstar player who can be the best player in the league. At best, they're probably going to be a top 5 player in the league, no matter what team they're on. But it's crucially that they're, like, fairly consistent. They're guys that don't have a big ego. I think it's what they add to the other super mega carry that makes them such a dynamic duo. And this reminds me of the early 90s Bulls, the first 3 wins. Because that was when Horace Grant, by the way, wasn't as impactful a player as Dennis Rodman was later. Dennis Rodman's one of the best rebounders ever. Horace Grant was just a good player. That was more comparable to Azontics. And it's more like, let's just get a good performance out of Horace Grant or Azontics and we have a chance to win here. But that was when Scottie Pippen, the first 3 peat, was still a really good player. He wasn't at Michael Jordan's level, but he was like a top 10 player in the NBA. He's bordering on top 5. That's Shiro. He's not the best player. He's probably never going to be the best player. But he's a top 10 player in CS, bordering on top 5 when he plays well and when he's in his form. But just like with Michael Jordan had to average like 30 points a game and take over all these games for you to ever beat the Knicks, to beat the big teams in the finals, etc. Had the 60-win games, etc. You could rely on him because he's Michael Jordan. I think if you're Donk, you shouldn't have to rely on Donk as much as this. He's still essentially a rookie in spirit, in both senses. Like, it's just I think it's too much. I used to say this about ZywOo in 2019 to 2021. I also thought you put way too much reliance on that guy to basically be literally the best player in the server every time he enters it. That's unfair. There needs to be, in his case, the problem is, ZywOo teams used to have a very good base floor, except for the Hyojin and Misuta one, but they didn't have the second star. Spirit has the second star, but then I don't think the baseline floor, unless Zwei actually ends up fragging decently, has been good enough. Their baseline floor isn't quite good enough, and it requires Donk to literally be the best player in the world to win most of these series. You even saw it in some of the maps at this tournament. You saw it in games at the last major. They just ask too much of him. So look, if he does it, here's the good news for Donk. Like Michael Jordan, it will make you one of the most ironclad GOAT cases ever. And everyone who saw what you did and saw what it took and that you had to just be the best all the time. There's a famous stat that like Michael Jordan got outscored in one playoff series ever. I think it was really early against the Bucks in like the mid-80s or something. Aside from that, he never lost as the favourite and he always was getting the fucking best of the scoring. Donk's going to have to do that. But you know what? Maybe he can. But I'm getting the horrible vibes of when Na'Vi had just enough talent around Simple to let him win, but not always. When ZywOo had just enough talent around him to put in position to win, but it would still be really hard to win. When you're in a world where Falcons has the 3-headed monster of superstars, when you're in a world where Vitality has this cracked out roster across the board, when Mouse has an average level where their worst player could walk in at any other top 10 team and be a top 3 player, and the map pool's nice and mapped out, you're just making it so fucking hard for Donk. And the worst thing for me is this: he seems to take it so personally when they do lose. It's like he always blames himself. On the one hand, I fuck with that. It's like what Simple used to do back in 2017 and 2018. He would lose after playing the best CS I've ever seen, and then he would actually think, look, I know I'm the best player, but I could have done more. I could have done something more in that round. I shouldn't have like baited someone on this pistol like that. I should have played it safe. Then I'd have won that round and we'd have won the game. What I love about that is you are addressing what you can actually do in the server instead of just bitching at a teammate. But the problem is the GM and the people behind Spirit, you could do more for this guy. You could get him a better... Look, it's not over. Let's see how Zwei plays. We'll still give him the rest of the season. But if by the next major, you're not like a lock for top 2, I think they really have to consider giving this guy more help. I think this isn't enough right now. And crucially, I think going forwards, I don't think you'll see that many big event wins from Spirit. I think you'll see they will get beaten by Vitality. Mouse will even get a few wins with them. Falcons eventually will be better than them, I think, by hook or crook, whether it needs another roster move. There are even those other teams out there who might be able to occasionally beat them, like a Na'Vi, like a Mongols, maybe an Aurora can get their shit together. Who knows? If Liquid can have... Look, that one, maybe I pushed the ball out too far, that one, but if Liquid ever gets a good roster, put it that way, they could do something. I think Spirit have just won a giant event, but they're one of the rare times I have to look at it. It certainly wasn't a fluke, but There are still some holes there, and there are questions which have temporarily been answered, but in the long run haven't. I don't forget the people that support me, and in the case of this video, that would be Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Jasun, Jensen Goh, Nicky, Tosh, Thorin, and you know who I'm always going to give the biggest shout out to, my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to find out who the next guest is on one of my interviews that I've already recorded but not yet released. Or maybe you want to take part in one of those fabled long-form discussions where you get to decide the topics. Well, if any of those perks or others tickle your fancy, simply click on the Patreon link in the description box below and put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.